Under the wide-open skies of North Texas lie two rival cities, Fort Worth, where the West begins, and Dallas, also known as Big D. In Fort Worth, cowboys and cattle transformed a tiny frontier outpost into one of the wildest cities in the American West. Just 30 miles away, Dallas rose on the promise of land and opportunity. It's where early settlers came to try and create a socialist utopia, and where freed slaves made their home after the Civil War in a place that's now an art and music mecca. It inspired a new team called the Cowboys that became the most valuable sports franchise in history. And it gave birth to a tiny no-frills airline that kicked off a travel revolution. Dallas and Fort Worth have always been proud of their unique identities, but they have also been co-stars in some of the same big stories. It was at a Fort Worth hotel where President John F. Kennedy delivered the last speech of his life, just hours before his assassination in Dallas. And today, Fort Worth and Dallas both power the fourth largest metropolis in the nation. It's home to one of the toughest firefighting teams in the world. An air base where America's latest defense systems are put to the test. And Friday Night Lights, when the best high school football teams in Texas go to battle in stadiums that are big enough to be pro. This is the fascinating story of Dallas-Fort Worth. One of the most spectacular sights in Dallas, Texas, is the city's towering skyline at dawn, reflected in the slow-moving waters of the Trinity River. This river has always been too rocky and shallow for ships to get here from the Gulf Coast. That makes Dallas the only major American city without access to a navigable waterway. But Big D has thrived nonetheless, thanks to a series of sales pitches and the promise of land and opportunity. The first to sell that promise was the man who gave Dallas its name, John Dealey Plaza. In 1839, he started a ferry service to help travelers cross the Trinity River. He then convinced others to settle here. That was how Dallas, Texas got its start. A few years later, a Frenchman named Victor Prosper Considerant sold the promise of Dallas again with a pitch that might surprise many today. He claimed that Dallas would be the perfect place to start a utopian socialist paradise, and managed to convince more than 200 Europeans to follow him to Texas. In 1855, they landed on the Gulf Coast and then lugged everything they owned to Dallas, some entirely on foot. It was here, 3 miles west of what's now downtown, where they tried to create a utopian community that could be an example to the rest of the world. They called it La Reunion. But their land turned out to be poor for farming, and storms, drought, and invasions of insects destroyed their crops. Within 5 years, the community had disbanded. Today, this graveyard is all that's left. But many of La Reunion's settlers stayed in Texas and used their skills as brewers, butchers, and carpenters to kick off the transformation of Dallas from a tiny frontier settlement into the city it is today. It might seem surprising that a group of utopian socialist dreamers played a big role in getting Dallas started, but it's true. Now, one of the city's most familiar landmarks honors their history and hard work. Its official name is Reunion Tower, but locals just call it the Ball. All day long, commuters pass under this distinctive Dallas structure on their way to work. It towers over an enormous web of ramps, highways, and bridges called the Horseshoe. It's just one of many impressive engineering projects that keep Dallas moving. This highway interchange is another one. It's been called one of the strangest roadways on Earth, thanks to its 5 levels of traffic, which soar 121 feet off the ground. The cities of Dallas and Fort Worth lie just over 30 miles apart, but they serve as giant anchors of a region called the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. It also covers dozens of other Texas cities and towns, including Irving, Grand Prairie, and Arlington. Inside the metroplex, to the north, is the massive Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the 4th busiest in the nation. Today, Dallas and Fort Worth may be part of a single metropolis, but from the days they were founded, these two Texas cities have held on tightly to their different identities. Fort Worth has long called itself the place where the West begins. And to understand how this city got its frontier spirit, you really have to understand how the state of Texas itself was born. It all started in the 1820s, when Mexico gained its independence from Spain and took possession of what was then the Spanish-controlled territory of Texas. At the time, a Native American people called the Comanche still ruled much of what's now West Texas. They were known as the Lords of the Plains. There were only a few small towns surrounding Spanish churches, like this one, Mission San Jose in San Antonio, which dates back to 1782. To develop the region, the Mexican government tried to lure Americans to Texas by offering them large grants of land. But in exchange, the settlers had to give up their U.S. citizenship and pledge their allegiance to Mexico. Thousands of Americans took up the offer and started building new communities here, like this one called Washington on the Brazos. But it wasn't long before the settlers found themselves in conflict with the Mexican state and many of the legal and cultural norms that it insisted the settlers follow. Mexico threatened to emancipate the settlers' slaves, since slavery was outlawed in Mexico. And the state imposed new tariffs on imported goods and supplies. The settlers launched small rebellions against the Mexican army, and then started organizing to establish their own nation of Texas. On March 2nd, 1836, 58 of them came to Washington on the Brazos to sign a Declaration of Independence from Mexico. This is a replica of the small building where they met, which was later named Independence Hall. Little did they know, their bid for freedom was about to come at a terrible cost. As they were gathering, more than 150 of their fellow Texas rebels came under siege at a former Catholic mission called the Alamo, almost 300 miles away from Dallas in San Antonio. 1,500 Mexican troops surrounded the rebels and gave them a choice: surrender without conditions or resist and be slaughtered. The rebels refused to accept unconditional surrender. And on March 6th, the Mexican army moved in and killed every man they could find. The dead included the American folk heroes Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, after whom the famous Bowie knife is named. Texans have been crying, "Remember the Alamo," ever since. But the next month, Texas settlers got their revenge on a battlefield at San Jacinto, which now lies outside the city of Houston. This monument marks the spot where roughly 900 fighters defeated a larger contingent of the Mexican army. They managed to capture its general and finally win their independence from Mexico. For the next 10 years, Texas existed as an independent republic. But in 1846, it joined the United States of America as the 28th state. Today, the Goddess of Liberty towers over the state capitol in Austin, 200 miles south of Dallas, and honors the tough fight Texans waged and won for their independence. But now, it was up to the U.S. government to protect Anglo-American settlers on the Texas frontier. And that's why Fort Worth was born. In 1849, a general named William Jenkins Worth became the new commander of Texas. He proposed a line of frontier forts that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico into what's now North Texas. Worth died from cholera in April 1849, but a few weeks later, a spot was chosen for the northernmost of the forts, on the banks of the Trinity River. It was named Fort Worth in the general's honor. The new frontier outpost stood on this bluff, where the towering Tarrant County Courthouse now lies today. The land west of here belonged to the United States, but the U.S. government didn't yet have full control of the region. Fort Worth was built to protect settlers on the frontier, and it's held on to that frontier identity ever since. But within a decade, cowboys and cattle started turning Fort Worth into a boomtown, and it was known as one of the wildest cities in the American West, with rowdy bars and legendary gunfighters that spilled blood on its streets. It's 10 a.m. at the Stockyards in Fort Worth, Texas. For more than a century, Longhorn cattle have been this city's biggest celebrities. They are descendants of the oldest breed of cows in America, which were introduced by the Spanish close to 500 years ago. They once used their distinctive horns to defend themselves in the wild. Today, most Longhorns are raised for their meat, but this herd is kept just for show. Twice a day, local cowboys round them up and drive them down East Exchange Avenue past their adoring fans. Cattle have been the stars of Fort Worth ever since the 1800s, when giant herds passed through the streets of this western city on their way to Kansas. After the Civil War, there was a rising demand for meat in fast-growing cities like New York and Chicago. And there was a plentiful supply of cows in Texas that had been left out to pasture during the war. In 1867, Illinois entrepreneur Joseph McCoy convinced the railways to build a site in Abilene, Kansas, where cattle could be loaded onto trains and shipped east. Cowboys could buy a cow in Texas for just $2 and sell it to meat packers in the Midwest for a $13 profit. Mounted on horseback, just like these modern-day Texas cowboys are today, they started driving cattle north along what's known as the Chisholm Trail. The trail began in South Texas as a web of feeder trails that merged and ran north through San Antonio and Fort Worth, and then across the territory of Oklahoma to a series of railheads west of Kansas City. By the late 1870s, close to 5 million cows had traveled up the Chisholm Trail. That great movement of cows and cowboys turned Fort Worth into a boomtown. It also turned one area of the city into one of the most infamous red light districts in America. It lay just north of the city's Union Station, where the Fort Worth Convention Center stands today. By the end of the 19th century, Just about every cowboy in Texas had either heard about or visited the saloons, gambling halls, and bordellos that line the blocks around Main and 15th Streets. The area came to be known as Hell's Half Acre. But shootouts and murders in the district caused city leaders to clamp down on activities here. And by 1900, most of the rowdiness was gone. In 1911, a local Baptist minister named J. Frank Norris started publicly naming and shaming the business leaders and politicians who frequented Fort Worth's bars and prostitutes. A few months later, his church was mysteriously burned to the ground. But it was already the beginning of the end of the acre. Father Norris was a graduate of the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, one of the largest seminaries in the world. Other famous alumni include Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, PBS journalist Bill Moyers, and megachurch leader Rick Warren. These days, religion is big business in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. It's home to some of the largest and richest megachurches in the nation. One of them is Kenneth Copeland Ministries. It's run by what may be the wealthiest family of televangelists in the world. Pastor Kenneth Copeland and his wife Gloria live on the shores of Eagle Mountain Lake, just a few miles northwest of downtown Fort Worth. Just behind their lakeside mansion is the ministry's own private airport. It was built in 1942 to train U.S. Marines how to fly gliders, but was abandoned after World War II. The Copelands bought the airport in the 1980s and built this new hangar. It houses the ministry's multi-million-dollar Gulfstream jet, which it bought from actor Tyler Perry. Just behind the airport lies the megachurch, where the Copelands film their regular broadcasts, which they claim reach close to 1 billion people a week worldwide. It's also where they collect the donations that have reportedly made them worth more than $750 million. They are just a few of the very wealthy church leaders who live and preach in the metroplex. Fort Worth began its life as an outpost of the Texas Army, and it's played a leading role in the nation's defense ever since. Today, pilots are practicing maneuvers in one of the most lethal aircraft on Earth. These are A-10 Thunderbolts, also known as Warthogs. They're returning to Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base, Fort Worth. Warthogs are famous for their ugly looks, but amazing engineering and firepower. Thick titanium armor protects their pilots and engines, while the laser-guided bombs under their wings are able to strike even the smallest targets with terrifying power and precision. The 7-barrel Gatling cannons in the nose are capable of taking out an armored tank with a single 30-millimeter round. This airfield is much more than just a base. It's also where many of America's most legendary planes and defense systems have been tested and made. Out on the runway, F-16 pilots are training for their next mission. These planes were built right here on the west side of the airfield in the colossal manufacturing plant of Lockheed Martin. Out on the runway, an F-18 Hornet is about to lift off. It belongs to a fighter squadron of the U.S. Marine Corps, known as the Cowboys. Once these fighter jets are airborne, they can reach speeds of up to 1,500 miles per hour. On November 21st, 1963, Air Force One, carrying President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jackie Kennedy, touched down on this very same runway. At the time, this was an Air Force base called Carswell Field. Kennedy was on his way to Dallas, but wanted to stop off here first to thank the people of Fort Worth for their contribution to the nation's defense. The Kennedys spent that night in Suite 850 in what's now the Hilton Fort Worth. The next morning, in the hotel's ballroom, Kennedy delivered the last speech of his life to a packed crowd. After city officials presented him with a Stetson cowboy hat and rattlesnake skin boots, Kennedy praised the people of Fort Worth for playing a critical role in protecting freedom around the world. Later that morning, the Kennedys returned to Carswell Field, where they boarded Air Force One. It was raining as they lifted off into the skies over North Texas. But by the time their short 15-minute flight landed here at Love Field in Dallas at 11:40 a.m., the sun was starting to shine. As the president's open-top limousine made its way down the streets of Dallas, thousands of people came out to welcome and cheer the Kennedys. Nellie Connolly, the First Lady of Texas, leaned over in the car and told JFK that he couldn't say Dallas didn't love him. Those may have been the last words ever spoken to the president. Just seconds later, at about 12:30 p.m., the limousine was passing through Dealey Plaza when shots rang out from a 6th-story corner window in the Texas School Book Depository. Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally, who was seated in front of him, were both hit. Within minutes, the presidential limousine arrived here at Parkland Hospital Emergency Room. But doctors were unable to revive Kennedy. By 1:33 p.m., news wires began informing the world that America's 35th president had been assassinated. Jackie Kennedy refused to change out of her blood-spattered pink suit, insisting that the world should see what JFK's killer had done. Doctors at Parkland insisted they were required by state law to keep Kennedy's body for an autopsy, but the Secret Service placed the casket in an ambulance and rushed it to Love Field. Exactly 3 hours after the Kennedys had landed in Dallas, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as President of the United States on board Air Force One, here on the tarmac of Love Field. Minutes later, Jackie Kennedy was lifting off for the flight back to Washington with her husband's body and casket by her side. In 1970, the city of Dallas installed this memorial, designed by architect Philip Johnson, close to where JFK was shot. With simple white concrete walls that appeared to float off the ground, and no ceiling, it was envisioned as an open and empty space that would inspire visitors to reflect and remember as they gaze up at the sky. The memorial was paid for with donations from residents of Dallas. At the same time Kennedy was shot, the Dallas Cowboys were playing the Browns in Cleveland. By the time the game was over, they were being called assassins by some of those in the stands. Dallas would soon be referred to by many as the City of Hate. It took a long time for Dallas to shed its dark identity as the city that killed Kennedy. But the rising success of the Cowboys and a wildly popular television show would change the way many people around the world saw Dallas. It may be the wide open skies of Texas that have always inspired people here to think big. And that's especially true in Dallas. Even though it's a landlocked city in the middle of the nation, people in Dallas have always found ways to connect their city to the rest of the world. That's how a little low-cost airline named Air Southwest got its start, right here at Love Field. In 1966, a Texas lawyer named Herb Kelleher pitched his friend and investor, Roland King, on the idea of a new airline to serve the people of Texas. Using a pen and cocktail napkin, he sketched out the airline's simple route between Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. King was intrigued, and 1 year later, in 1967, their new budget airline was in business. The first Boeing 737 that Southwest ever flew in 1971 is now parked at the Frontiers of Flight Aviation Museum at Dallas Love Field. It still has its original 1970-style seats and interior. Kelleher expanded Southwest with cheap pricing and no frills, which was a new way to fly in the 1970s. Passengers got peanuts instead of meals. There was no first or business class, and Southwest didn't even offer assigned seating. But that was the trade-off for cheap tickets, and Southwest's business boomed. Today, it's the largest domestic carrier in the nation, with a fleet of 700 Boeing 737s. Most other major airlines have since followed Southwest's no-frills lead. Kelleher died in 2019, but the airline is still headquartered here in Dallas. It looks out over a sea of Southwest jets, all painted in the company's signature colors, including this one with the Texas Star. It was named Lone Star 1 to honor the state where Southwest was born. People from Dallas love Love Field because it's small and close to the city. So when Fort Worth tried to convince Dallas to build a new shared airport between them, people in Dallas protested. They were perfectly happy with their little Love Field. But as the population of the metroplex grew, the U.S. government forced Dallas and Fort Worth to join together and build a new airport that could serve both cities. Little did they know, DFW International Airport would help turn the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex into an economic powerhouse and a major U.S. hub for air passengers and cargo. Today, DFW covers more land than Manhattan and even has its own zip code. It was planned as a series of semicircular terminals that could be built as needed as the airport grew. So far, there are 5, and space to build 8 more if DFW needs to expand. When John Neely Bryan founded Dallas in 1841, he imagined it as a gathering place for travelers crossing Texas. More than a century and a half later, he would be awestruck by what the Dallas region has become today. 64 million passengers from around the world transit through DFW every year. It's the biggest symbol of how Dallas and Fort Worth have succeeded in working together to make their metroplex one of the most powerful economic success stories in the nation. It's 2 p.m. and the largest passenger plane in the world, an Airbus 380, is touching down on runway 36R. Just before passengers land at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, many spot what looks like an Airbus 380 in the distance on fire. The flames are real, but this plane is just a mock-up at the DFW's Fire Training Research Center. It's the home of one of the most advanced aviation firefighting teams in the world. Firefighters come here from across the globe to train for every kind of aviation emergency imaginable. Inside the control tower, staff can ignite a range of flammable liquids and aircraft props on demand. On the north side of the facility is what's called the 3D liquid hydrocarbon fuel pit. Here, teams learn how to extinguish burning aviation fuel as it drips and flows using water, foam, and dry chemicals. Airport firefighters in the U.S. are required to undergo live fire exercises every 12 months to stay current. And nothing tests their skills like the giant mock-up of an Airbus 380. It's the only one of its kind in the world and can be turned into a raging inferno at the flick of a switch. As soon as the team in the control tower opens the propane gas valves, the A380 is engulfed by fire. Burning jet fuel can melt the aluminum fuselage of a real passenger jet in just 60 to 90 seconds. But this steel trainer is a battle-scarred warrior. It's been designed to survive hundreds of burns. This is where teams can practice putting out engine fires and burning landing gear. Inside this 3-level trainer, they also practice fighting fires in the cockpit, seating areas, lavatories, and cargo holds. Today, firefighters on the ground are getting help from others in high-tech crash trucks known as strikers to get this blaze under control. This is one example of how DFW has turned its landlocked location in the middle of the country into an asset by providing firefighters nationwide and even worldwide with easy access to the training they need. Today, just a few miles west of the airport, a drilling team is fracking a well for oil and gas. Fort Worth happens to lie on top of one of the largest underground fields of natural gas in the world. There are thousands of wells in this one county alone, and every one of them is tapping into what's known as the Barnett Shale. 5,000 feet down are enormous reserves of natural gas, locked in layers of very hard rock called shale. For years, energy companies here thought it was a waste of time and money to try and fracture the shale with water, chemicals, and sand to get to the gas. But in 1995, on this small, unassuming drilling pad, a 31-year-old oil worker named Nick Steinsberger kicked off an energy revolution. He started experimenting with new techniques to fracture the shale by injecting the rock with a mix of much more water and fewer chemicals and sand than anyone had tried before. After tweaking his recipe again and again, he suddenly discovered that the well was producing more than 1 million cubic feet of gas per day, a staggering amount at the time. Energy companies have been using and refining Steinsberger's technique to tap huge gas fields under Texas, Pennsylvania, and South Dakota. But this unassuming well, known as S.H. Griffin No. 4, is considered the mother of all fracking wells and still produces gas today. Fort Worth sits on billions of dollars worth of fossil fuels, but surprisingly, there's no oil under Dallas. The city is like a donut hole. It's surrounded by oil, but has none of its own. That may come as a surprise to television viewers. For many, Big D and Big Oil are one and the same, thanks to a famous fictional oil-rich family that captivated viewers around the world for 13 years in the television series Dallas. Every week between 1978 and 1991, millions of television viewers worldwide eagerly awaited the sight of this arched gate and the white columns of South Fork Ranch in the opening titles of the wildly popular television series Dallas. For 357 episodes, fans tuned in to find out what J.R. Ewing would do next to members of his own family to maintain his iron grip on Ewing Oil. No house says Dallas, Texas like this one, even though it actually lies to the north in the city of Parker. Only a few scenes were shot here at South Fork, which is now a tourist site and convention center. Most of the series was shot in Los Angeles. But Dallas had its own real oil tycoon, who was even more colorful than JR. And he too lived in a white columned mansion just outside the city. His name was H.L. Hunt. Hunt claimed to be a frugal man, but when he built this mansion in 1929, he modeled the house and grounds after Mount Vernon, the vast Northern Virginia estate of President George Washington. Hunt made his first fortune by risking winnings from gambling on oil leases in Arkansas. He was then an early investor in one of the most lucrative oil fields in the world, in East Texas. By the time he died in 1974, Hunt was worth hundreds of millions of dollars and had been called the richest man on earth. It was one of his 15 children, Lamar Hunt, who helped turn Dallas into a Major League football town, even though things didn't go as he originally planned. In the 1950s, Lamar Hunt wanted to start a new NFL team in Dallas. The problem was, the NFL didn't think Dallas was a good market for football and refused to authorize Hunt's new team. So he and a few other owners decided to start a new rival league of their own, which they named the American Football League, or AFL. For 2 seasons, starting in 1960, Hunt's team, the Dallas Texans, played here at the Cotton Bowl. But now, fearful of the AFL, the NFL changed its mind and launched a new Dallas team of its own called the Cowboys, which it hoped would win the hearts of Dallas football fans and drive out the Texans. Both teams played on the same field at the Cotton Bowl on different nights of the week, and each tried every trick they could to sell more tickets. 3 years later, in 1963, the NFL had finally succeeded in winning over Dallas football fans. Hunt moved his team to Kansas City and renamed it the Chiefs. Hunt claimed to be the one who coined the term Super Bowl, words he used to describe the 1967 championship matchup between the best AFL and NFL teams. The two leagues eventually merged in 1969. In the 1970s, under legendary coach Tom Landry, the Cowboys started winning more games than any other NFL team, including 2 Super Bowls against the Dolphins and the Broncos. But in the 1980s, their amazing run came to an end. They began losing season after season, and the franchise ended up on the verge of bankruptcy. That's when an oil man named Jerry Jones, who lives in this Spanish-style mansion west of downtown, decided to take a big risk. He spent $140 million to buy the then money-losing team. It was more than anyone had ever paid before for a sports franchise. Over the next decade, under Jones' ownership, the Cowboys made a spectacular comeback and won 3 more Super Bowls. Today, the Cowboys practice here in Frisco, Texas, at a facility called the Star. Jones's $140 million bet is now valued at more than $4 billion. He says that he's never worked a single day since buying the Cowboys, that owning the team has been all pleasure. And he's not the only team owner in Dallas to make that claim. Billionaire Mark Cuban lives just a few blocks from Jerry Jones, in this vast estate in the neighborhood of Highland Park. He has owned the NBA's Dallas Mavericks since 2000. Cuban says he bought the Mavericks as a way to have fun. But his courtside antics have earned him a total of more than $2.5 million in fines from the NBA. In 2002, Cuban got upset with a referee's call here at a Mavericks game at the American Airlines Center and told the ref he wouldn't even hire him to manage a Dairy Queen. That's when the marketing team at Dairy Queen saw an opportunity. As a publicity stunt, they challenged Cuban to work as a manager for the day in a local franchise to show people how hard the work actually was. Cuban readily agreed and spent an 8-hour shift handing out soft-serve cones and blizzards at this Dairy Queen in nearby Coppell, Texas. more than 1,000 people showed up to be served by the Mavericks' billionaire owner. It was a smart marketing move by Dairy Queen, and the event got play on national news and helped raise thousands of dollars for a children's charity. Today, Mark Cuban may be Dallas's biggest booster yet. He believes the metroplex has more promise than ever before, just like the city's founder, John Neely Bryan, did back in the 1840s. It was that promise that lured an American president here in 2008. That's when George W. Bush announced that his presidential library would be built on the campus of Southern Methodist University, just outside the city. The vast complex, called the George W. Bush Presidential Center, was finally dedicated in 2013 in a ceremony attended by 5 living presidents, including both Bushes, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. Inside the center, a museum documents the life and legacy of President George W. Bush. But all across Dallas are the legacies of many others who have had a big impact on the life and culture of this city. The colorful neighborhood of Deep Ellum, built just after the Civil War, is one of them. The Civil War ravaged most cities in the American South, but while Texas was part of the Confederacy, Dallas and Fort Worth survived the war intact. When it was over, hundreds of freed slaves from across the South came here to start new lives. Many sought out jobs in the busy train yards of Dallas and Fort Worth. But both these two Texas cities were highly segregated, and African Americans weren't allowed to live in white-only neighborhoods or even use the elevators in shopping centers downtown. So they started their own communities on the outskirts. They were known as freedmen's towns. One of them was established in 1873 here along Elm Street, which runs east out of downtown Dallas. The neighborhood is still known today as Deep Ellum. By the 1920s, Deep Ellum was a busy commercial center and a hub for processing cotton. Ford Motor Company had a factory here to make its Model Ts. But the district became best known for its thriving music scene. Its bars and clubs hosted some of the biggest names of the day in jazz and blues, including Robert Johnson, Sam Lightnin' Hopkins, Bessie Smith, and Leadbelly. But in the 1950s, Dallas constructed a new elevated highway right through the heart of Deep Ellum, forcing many music venues and businesses here to close. It wasn't until the late 1980s that new clubs opened and the music scene returned. Then in 2012, a real estate developer offered the blank walls of his buildings to artists from Texas and around the world to create public art for Dallas. Hundreds of artists applied for a chance to make their mark on the city. Images of the 42 different murals they created went viral. It was Romanian-born artist Dan Kolcher who created this Deep Ellum version of the Roman god Janus, with his 2 heads that looked to both the past and the future. In 2017, a local artist named Steve Hunter realized there wasn't yet a mural of the Dallas-born music legend Stevie Ray Vaughan, so he created one of his own just off Main Street. Deep Ellum's large-scale public art is now a big draw for visitors to Dallas, and it's not limited to murals. On the west side are a series of enormous robot-like figures created from sheet metal and rivets. They are all part of a work called Traveling Man. These enormous sculptures were designed and built by Brandon Oldenburg and Brad Oldham to honor Deep Ellum's railway history. This one, named Standing Tall, towers over a station of Dallas Area Rapid Transit, which commissioned the works in 2005. Antebellum's eye-catching public art has lured millions here during the day. But when the sun sets over the metroplex, this art and music mecca truly comes alive. Every year, a street festival honors the neighborhood's rich history and its contribution to the life and culture of Dallas. For one weekend in April, it's a massive street party. But it was on a night like this one in 2016 that Dallas experienced its most horrifying event since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. On the evening of July 7th, a crowd started gathering in downtown Dallas to protest the recent police shootings of black men across the country. At 7:15 p.m., roughly 800 marchers set out from the city's Below Garden. By the time the sun began to set, they were making their way down Elm Street. But as they approached the city's El Centro College, a man appeared, walked up to 3 police officers, and suddenly shot them dead. A gunfight erupted. At first, Dallas police believed there were multiple snipers positioned on surrounding rooftops. But it turned out to be a lone gunman who was firing indiscriminately to draw their attention, and then repositioning to ambush responding officers from behind. The attacker, now injured, managed to get inside one of the college's buildings at Elm and North Lamar Streets. There were still students inside when the shooter took up a position on the 2nd floor and then taunted officers below with rants and gunfire. He said he wanted to kill white people and police officers as payback for the recent killings of African Americans by police across the country. After a 2-hour standoff, Dallas PD decided to send in a remote-controlled robot armed with a camera and explosives. As the robot approached the shooter, he tried to take it out with semi-automatic gunfire. But the Dallas PD detonated the bomb, and the blast killed him. By then, 5 officers from the Dallas Police Department were dead, and 9 had been injured. In the days that followed, Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush joined together at a memorial for the slain officers. They made a call for unity and healing nationwide between citizens and police. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex has experienced its fair share of national news-making events. But usually, the biggest drama here is what happens every Friday night when high school teams head out onto the field under bright lights like these and go to battle. Tonight, just west of Dallas, the Saxe Mustangs in white jerseys are squaring off against the Rowlett Eagles in the biggest game of the year. This year, Saxe is the #1 team in the district. Rowlett is #2. If Saxe can win this game, they'll be 3-time district champions. They're playing at the Homer B. Johnson Stadium in Garland, which has its own pro-sized jumbotron and 15,000 seats. Texas has the biggest and most expensive high school stadiums in the nation and some of the longest-standing team rivalries. That's one reason people across the Metroplex put down whatever they're doing on Friday nights in the fall and gather to cheer on their favorite teams. It's games like this one across Texas that inspired the best-selling book Friday Night Lights, which was turned into a movie and television series. Tonight, the Mustangs are scoring touchdown after touchdown. They're on their way to beating the Eagles 48-0 to take home their 3rd championship in a row. But after the sun has set over the Metroplex, there are many quiet places too, especially here in downtown Fort Worth. Once, the district of Hell's Half Acre was known for its rowdy bars, street fights, and colorful bordellos. Today, these very same streets beckon residents after dark with water and light. This water garden was designed by renowned architect Philip Johnson in the 1970s. His design was futuristic then and reveals that Fort Worth has long been much more than a cow town. Just like Dallas, it's also a fast-growing city with its eye on the future. And when you soar across the Dallas skyline at night, the most distinctive form here is still the ball of Reunion Tower. It's a constant reminder that these two cities wouldn't exist without the utopian dreams and hard work of early settlers who kicked off the transformation of two bends in the Trinity River into the metropolis of Dallas-Fort Worth.